For 15 years, I wasn't just an employee, I was the architect of my boss's success. I was his executive assistant, a title so laughably inadequate it was a corporate joke between us. In reality, I was his shadow, his co-pilot, his gatekeeper, and most importantly, his memory. I joined the company straight out of college, a bright-eyed, ambitious girl who saw in him a mentor, a titan of the industry. He was charismatic, a whirlwind of expensive suits, dazzling smiles, and grand pronouncements. He could walk into a room and charm a rattlesnake out of its own skin. I was mesmerized. I dedicated my life to his vision, to the growth of his consulting firm. My days didn't start at 9 and end at 5. They started when he needed me and ended when he was done. I sacrificed vacations, relationships, and countless hours of sleep, all for the sake of the company. My loyalty was absolute, a thing of granite. In return, he rewarded me with a handsome salary, generous bonuses, and a front-row seat to the inner workings of power. And with that seat came knowledge. I learned early on that the company's gleaming public facade was built on a very murky foundation. I was the one who managed the second ledger, a beautifully simple but brutally effective accounting book that existed only in a password-protected file on a server he thought only he could access. I was the one who coded the invoices for special projects, a euphemism for the cash kickbacks paid to secure lucrative government contracts. I was the one who booked his business trips to the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, knowing full well they were to manage the offshore accounts where a significant portion of the company's real profits were siphoned, far from the prying eyes of the tax authorities. I saw it all, the bribes disguised as consulting fees. The ghost employees on the payroll whose salaries were funneled back to him. The systematic inflation of billable hours to our biggest clients. For years, I justified my complicity. I told myself this was just how the game was played at this level. I told myself my loyalty was to him, the man, not to a nebulous code of ethics. He was building an empire, and empires are not built by saints. My job was to protect the king, and so I became the silent, efficient keeper of his secrets, the high priestess of his corruption. I was so good at my job that I made him feel invincible. He never had to worry about the details because I had them all under control. I was the firewall between his glittering success and the grubby, illegal reality that funded it. Then, after years of trying, after 2 miscarriages that I grieved in the quiet of my office bathroom before returning to my desk to reschedule his international flights, I got pregnant. It was a fragile, terrifying, miraculous joy. For the first time in my adult life, I had a secret that was entirely my own, a flicker of a future that had nothing to do with balance sheets or quarterly reports. It was a small, defiant act of building a life for myself, separate from the one I had so diligently built for him. I waited until I was safely in the second trimester to tell him. I chose a quiet moment at the end of a successful week. We had just landed a massive new client, thanks to a special project I had personally arranged, and he was in a magnanimous mood. I walked into his office, my heart a fluttering bird in my chest, and I shared my news. The initial reaction was everything I could have hoped for. The dazzling smile was switched on. He came around his desk, hugged me awkwardly, and offered his hearty congratulations. He talked about how the company was a family, how he'd support me in every way. For a brief, naive moment, I believed him. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. A week later, he hired a new junior executive, a sharp young man from a rival firm. He told me it was to ease my workload as my pregnancy progressed, but then he started CCing the new guy on emails that were once for my eyes only. He began to delegate tasks to him, tasks that had been my exclusive domain for over a decade. He'd hold meetings with him that I wasn't invited to. I was being slowly, methodically, and quietly sidelined. The final, brutal blow came a month later. He called me into his office at 5 p.m. on a Friday. He didn't smile. He gestured for me to sit, but he remained standing, pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. He started with a long, rambling speech about the changing needs of the company, about the need for a more dynamic and forward-facing team. It was all meaningless corporate jargon, a smokescreen for the cruelty to come, and then he said it. "We're going to have to let you go," he said, the words as cold and sharp as shards of glass. "Your focus has clearly shifted. Your dedication is not what it used to be. The company needs someone who can give 110%, and frankly, with your upcoming situation, that's just not going to be you." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. 15 years of my life, of my unwavering, all-consuming dedication, erased in a single sentence. I had covered up his crimes, protected his secrets, sacrificed my own life for his success, and my reward was to be thrown away like a piece of broken office equipment because I was having a baby. I was a liability, a problem to be solved. He slid a thin folder across the desk. "This is a generous severance package," he said, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. "It's of course contingent on you signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." The NDA, the final insult. He wasn't just firing me, he was trying to buy my silence, to ensure that the keeper of the secrets remained silent. He didn't see a loyal employee or a pregnant woman. He saw a threat. I didn't say a word. I stood up, my legs trembling, and I looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time without the filter of my blind loyalty. I saw a weak, terrified little man propped up by a scaffolding of lies that I had helped to build. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken my loyalty for stupidity. He thought he could discard me and that I would just fade away quietly. He had no idea what he had just done. He hadn't just fired a pregnant employee. He had declared war on the one person in the world who knew how to burn his kingdom to the ground. And as I walked out of that office for the last time, I felt the cold, hard certainty of what I had to do. I was going to collect a severance package, but it wasn't going to be the one in that folder. My severance would be his utter and complete ruin. The first 48 hours after my termination were a masterclass in controlled fury. The grief and shock were there, a howling tempest beneath the surface, but on the outside I was ice. I didn't call my friends to cry or my parents to complain. I went home to my quiet, empty apartment and I began to work. For years I had maintained what I called my insurance policy. My boss was brilliant but arrogant, a dangerous combination. I always knew a day might come when he would see me as disposable, so I had prepared. Discreetly, over the course of a decade, I had built a digital fortress of his crimes. Every time I processed a fraudulent invoice, I saved a digital copy to an encrypted, multi-layered thumb drive the size of my pinky nail. Every time I recorded a transaction in the second ledger, I made a backup of the file. Every email in which he alluded to a bribe or a kickback was flagged and covertly forwarded to a dummy email account I had created for this sole purpose. I had audio files from meetings he'd asked me to record and then delete, where he spoke with chilling candor about hiding assets and deceiving auditors. I had spreadsheets meticulously detailing the flow of money from the company to his offshore shell corporations, complete with account numbers, transfer dates, and the names of the complicit bankers. This thumb drive was my life's work, the dark, mirrored archive of the empire I helped build. I spent that first weekend organizing this data, compiling it into a coherent, damning narrative. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee with a grudge, I was a prosecutor building an airtight case. I created timelines, flowcharts, and a glossary of his coded language. What I had was not just smoke, it was a raging inferno of evidence, a detailed step-by-step instruction manual on how to dismantle his life. On Monday morning, I didn't call an employment lawyer. A wrongful termination suit was a slingshot, and I was building a nuclear bomb. I called a man I had read about, a former federal prosecutor who had gone into private practice. His specialty wasn't labor law, it was corporate fraud and whistleblower cases. He was a shark and I had a boat full of chum. I met with him and his team of forensic accountants later that week. I walked into their stark, modern conference room and laid the thumb drive on the polished table. For 3 hours I walked them through the evidence. I watched their faces change from professional skepticism to wide-eyed predatory glee. They were not just seeing a lawsuit, they were seeing a landmark case. They were seeing headlines, government investigations, and the kind of career-making takedown that lawyers dream about. They took the case on a contingency basis, their potential cut of any government whistleblower reward being a far greater prize than any hourly fee. While they began the process of verifying my evidence and preparing the formal whistleblower submissions to the SEC and the IRS, I began my own, more subtle campaign. I knew my ex-boss. His ego was his Achilles heel. He thought he had won, that I had been neutralized by his generous severance offer, which I had, of course, ignored. He would be moving on, celebrating his freedom from his newly undedicated assistant. He wouldn't be looking over his shoulder. I wanted him to feel comfortable. I wanted him to feel secure in his castle of lies before I blew it to pieces. I decided to leak. I created another anonymous email account and contacted an investigative journalist, a woman with a reputation for being a bulldog, someone who had brought down 2 senators and a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I didn't give her everything, I just gave her a taste. I sent her a single, heavily redacted document showing a massive, undeclared payment from a foreign entity to one of the company's shell corporations. It was just one thread, but I knew that for a reporter like her, it would be enough to start pulling. Within days, I started to see the first ripples. A small article appeared deep in the financial section of a major newspaper, raising questions about the company's international accounting practices. It was vague, but it was a start. The company's stock, which was privately held but closely watched by investors, dipped slightly. My ex-boss issued a blustering denial, calling the report baseless and irresponsible journalism. He was swatting at a fly, having no idea a swarm of hornets was about to descend. My legal team, in the meantime, had packaged my evidence and formally submitted it to the relevant government agencies under the whistleblower program. This was the point of no return. The gears of the federal bureaucracy grind slowly, but I had just handed them a mountain of perfectly organized, high-octane fuel. An investigation was no longer a matter of if but when, and it would be a multi-agency investigation, a full-scale assault. A month after I was fired, my ex-boss's lawyer sent me a final threatening letter regarding the severance agreement, warning of legal action if I didn't sign the NDA. I had my new lawyer respond. His reply was a masterpiece of legal understatement. It simply said, "We advise your client to direct any future correspondence to us. Furthermore, we believe it would be in your client's best interest to preserve all financial documents as he may be needing them for upcoming official inquiries." It was a veiled threat, a subtle hint that we knew something he didn't. The call came 2 weeks later in the middle of the night from a former colleague, a woman in accounting who had always been kind to me. Her voice was a panicked whisper. "They're here," she said. "Federal agents, they're everywhere. They're seizing computers, files, everything. What's going on?" I hung up the phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. The quiet, methodical work was over. The storm had made landfall. I walked over to the nursery I had been slowly putting together, the room filled with the soft colors of my new life. I placed a hand on my growing belly. He had tried to take my future, to punish me for creating this new life. He didn't understand. This new life, this child, wasn't a weakness, it was my strength. It was the reason I was fighting back with such ruthless, calculated fury. He had started a war to protect his corrupt empire, but I was fighting for something far more important, my child's future and my own. The raid was the lead story on the morning news. I watched, sipping chamomile tea, as footage of stone-faced federal agents carrying evidence boxes out of my old office building played on a loop. My ex-boss was shown trying to push past the cameras, his handsome, charismatic face now a twisted mask of panic and rage. The journalist I had leaked to ran a front-page exposé, a devastatingly detailed account of the company's culture of corruption, citing information from a highly placed, confidential source. The article was a work of art, connecting the dots I had given her and uncovering even more dirt on her own. It was a kill shot. The company imploded with breathtaking speed. Clients, terrified of being associated with a federal investigation, terminated their contracts en masse. Key employees, fearing prosecution, resigned and rushed to hire their own lawyers. The banks froze the company's credit lines. Within a month, the firm that had been my entire world for 15 years was forced to declare bankruptcy, its assets to be liquidated, its name forever tarnished. My ex-boss was arrested at his palatial home. The charges were staggering: wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, bribery of public officials. The government had used my evidence as a roadmap, and it had led them directly to him. His bail was set at a figure so high, not even his hidden offshore accounts could meet it. His world had shrunk from bespoke suits and private jets to an orange jumpsuit and a 6-by-9-foot cell. The legal process was slow and methodical. As the primary whistleblower, my identity was protected, but I was the prosecution's star witness. The day I gave my deposition was the first time I saw him since he had fired me. We were in a sterile conference room, separated by a long table and a phalanx of lawyers. When he was led in, he looked older, smaller, a ghost of the titan I had once revered. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. In that moment, he understood. He finally knew who had brought his world crashing down. The look on his face was not one of anger, but of utter, soul-crushing defeat. He had been so worried about me talking, he never considered that I had the receipts. The wrongful termination suit was quietly settled by the bankruptcy trustees for a sum that was, by any measure, life-changing. It was a tacit admission that what he had done was not just immoral but illegal. The money was a vindication, but it was never the point. The point was the justice. The point was the silence in his grand, empty office, the for sale sign on the lawn of his mansion, the panicked look in his eyes as he finally faced the consequences of his actions. 2 weeks before my due date, he accepted a plea bargain rather than face a trial where I would testify against him. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He lost everything: his company, his fortune, his freedom. He had tried to rob me of one of the most important chapters of my life, and in return I had taken the rest of his. My daughter was born on a bright, sunny morning in early spring. As I held her in my arms, I knew that the fight was well and truly over. The rage that had fueled me for months was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective love that was more powerful than any desire for revenge. She was my new beginning, the living, breathing proof that he had not broken me. With the settlement money, I didn't retire. I started my own consulting firm, a small, ethical company built on the principles of transparency and integrity, everything his company was not. I hired some of the best people from the old firm, the ones who had been unaware of the corruption at the top. We were successful not because we cut corners or paid bribes, but because we were good at what we did. My life was full, it was my own. One day, a few years later, I was reading an article online about white-collar criminals who had found a new purpose in prison. The article mentioned my ex-boss. It said he was teaching a business ethics class to other inmates. The irony was so profound I had to laugh out loud. He had claimed I was no longer dedicated. He was wrong. My dedication hadn't vanished. It had simply been transferred. I had transferred it from him to the truth. And my dedication to the truth had not only set me free, it had dismantled an empire and built me a new, better one in its place. He thought he was closing a door on my career, but he had opened a gate to a life I could never have imagined, a life of my own making, a life of which I was the sole and undisputed owner. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.